This lecture, we will be talking about European exploration. This goes along with the PowerPoints that are located in our Blackboard course under Content. I suggest that you follow along with those PowerPoints and take notes as you go. There are several reasons why Europeans began exploration in the late 1400s. One of those is because Europe began to experience a population boom. If you take a look at the graph that's there in this PowerPoint slide, you will see that from 1300 down to about 1348, there is a slow decline of population. And then beginning in 1348 to 1400, there's a dramatic drop in population in Europe. This was due to the Black Death or the bubonic plague. And the bubonic plague swept through Europe, killing 1/3 of the population over the course of about 50 years. And so then we begin in 1400, beginning to see a slow uptick. And by the time we get to the late 1400s, we are watching Europe experience a population boom. And a lot of times when European nations begin to have an excessive amount of population, they begin to want to look outward. They begin to want to find areas and ways to move their people groups. And so one of the reasons why they began exploration was because of the population boom that was going on. Another reason why was because of the influence of Henry the Navigator. His little handsome picture is right there. Henry the Navigator was a prince in Portugal, and he opened a navigation school. And in his navigation school, he provided new tools for maritime exploration. The word maritime means by the seas or the waters. And so at his school, you could have access to some of the new maps. You could have introduction to the new ships. The new ships are the caravels. Here is a picture of the new caravel. You could have access to the new compasses. You could learn some of the latest sailing techniques. And so because of Prince Henry's influence and his school, we're going to begin to see more people and sailors moving out into maritime exploration. Another reason why is because kings and queens are going to want other ways to get goods from Asia and from the Far East outside of just the land routes. If you see the map up there, that's a map of Europe, and all of that are trade routes that go through the land. There are goods that these European nations want that are over in the Asian territories, and bringing those in by land routes began to become more and more dangerous. And so explorers began to move out to try to find ways to get those goods by water. The adventures and writings of Marco Polo was another reason why. It sparked a lot of interest. It sparked the imagination of the people. Marco Polo had gone over into China and parts of Asia in the 1300s and came home and wrote about it in his book called Travels with Marco Polo. And this was beginning to also influence a lot of movements out into maritime exploration. We also have a new weapon called the wheel-lock pistol, and this is going to give another kind of impetus behind exploration as we begin to see more and more people groups head out with weapons and also with the desire to bring in goods from other parts of the world back to Europe. And so the first nations that began exploration in Europe were Portugal and Spain. And Portugal was first. Henry the Navigator was Portuguese, and so it only kind of makes sense that he spearheads some of this. And Portugal's first explorations went along the western coast of Africa. This is a map of Europe and Africa, and you will notice from this map that the northern part of Africa there is the same color as Europe. What that means is that the northern part of Africa was well known to the Europeans. But once you begin to move further down the African continent, the Europeans knew very little of what went on in the African continent. And once you got below the equator, it was known as the Great Unknown. Many of our Europeans did not realize the way that people could sail around the tip of Africa. There's a lot of fear associated with the unknown. And so when our first Portuguese explorers head out, they head out along the western coast of Africa. When they do that, they are going to discover various types of new goods, such as ivory, gold, rice, and slaves. Slavery had been in place since the beginning of world history. It has always played a huge role in civilizations. And in this period of time, Africans were enslaving each other, Muslim nations were enslaving Africans, and we will begin to see the movements into Europeans beginning to enslave as well. Bartholomew Diaz is going to be the first to accidentally sail around the southern tip of Africa. And what he's trying to get to are these goods over in Asia, specifically over in India. If you look at the map over here, you see Asia, and then India comes down, kind of makes this V. The Indian trade market was a huge market for bringing in goods from Asia and from the Far East, and those are some of the goods that the Europeans wanted. And so Diaz accidentally sails around the southern tip of Africa. He doesn't make it to India, but he proves that you can go around the southern tip of Africa and continue onward. And so in 1498, Vasco da Gama will be the first to intentionally sail around the southern tip of Africa, and he will make it to India. He will establish a Portuguese trading market there in India, allowing for goods to be traded back and forth between the Europeans and the Asian Far Eastern goods. Spain is not going to be far behind. Spain is going to begin her exploration primarily under the wing of Christopher Columbus. Columbus was not Spanish, he was Italian, but he had a perspective that you could sail across the world by means of going straight west across the Atlantic Ocean to get to the goods that were over in Asia as well. And so he grew up along the waters. He went to Henry's school, and he set out on behalf of Spain in 1492 with the Nina, the Pinta de Santa Maria, in search of the goods over in the Indies, the Indian territory of the Far East. When he lands, oh, by the way, this is a map of that Christopher Columbus would have used. And one of the things that you'll notice here is that there is something missing from this map, and it is, of course, um, the whole Western Hemisphere. Both of the Americas are missing here. And so his idea of sailing across to get to these goods meant that the Western Hemisphere wasn't there. Of course, this will be a shock because he will find the Western Hemisphere and North and South America. And so Columbus will eventually have 4 expeditions across the Atlantic Ocean. And there he will come in contact with, he and his men will come in contact with the native populations on the islands. And there we will begin to see the exchange of goods as well as the beginnings of the eradication of native populations in the islands specifically. As Spain began to move across the Atlantic Ocean, Portugal was fearful that she would be left behind with what is being discovered out in the Atlantic. And so a treaty was established. This was called the Treaty of Tordesillas. And what it did was it drew an imaginary line through the Atlantic Ocean. And it basically said that all of the lands that are discovered to the east of this line will belong to Portugal, and all of the lands that are discovered to the west of this line will belong to Spain. Now you got to keep in mind, they have no idea that this is what the hemispheres look like, that this is what the land looks like at this point. And so the line was drawn. In essence, Portugal will lose out with this. The only real thing she's going to get is Brazil, and that is where they speak Portuguese. And then Spain will end up being able to claim the rest in Central and South America, and that is where they speak Spanish. Spain began to send over conquistadors. This is the Spanish word for conqueror, and they began to move into South America to conquer the people groups that they came across there. One of the most famous was Hernando Cortez, and he met up against the Aztecs. whose leader was Montezuma. The Aztec Empire looked like this at this time. Tenochtitlan was its capital, and Cortez and his men arrived. And after leaving behind smallpox and having a battle, Cortez will conquer the Aztec Empire, and Spain will take control of the empire. Spain will continue to move into the Western Hemisphere, and Spain's approach to the New World is called encomienda. Encomienda means on paper that the Spanish will enlist the natives to work the land on behalf of the Spanish. In reality, encomienda means that the Spanish will enslave or subjugate the natives and use them to strip the land of the goods and send those goods back to Spain. And so Spain is going to become very, very wealthy during this time period as she begins to pull more and more goods out of the islands and out of South America. Spain was successful in the New World with her conquering by means of iron weapons and, of course, the role of disease. Smallpox is going to decimate the native populations. More and more explorers began to head over into the Western Hemisphere as it became recognizable that this was something brand new, that this was new land, according to the Europeans. And many of these explorers came from various nations, some of them looking for El Dorado, the infamous city of gold. And you can see from this map here the nations coming over and who came over and where they went as they began to explore and claim land in the New World. A couple of key Spanish explorers. Ferdinand Magellan will be given credit for being the first to sail around the world. He heads out in 1519 from Spain. He works his way down the South American coast. He sails across the Pacific. And when he gets over to what were called the Spice Islands, the area around Australia, Magellan will be killed. But a few of his men will continue on and they will finish the journey, showing that you can sail around the world. Francisco Pizarro will be the first to conquer the Incan Empire. Pizarro and his men will come in. They will get in the midst of a kind of civil war going on, and they will support one side of the civil war and promptly kill the victor. And then Pizarro will take possession on behalf of Spain of the Incas. And so what we're seeing happen here with exploration is Spain beginning to come in, and not only will we see a merging of some cultures here, we will see some eradication of some cultures here as well, and we will begin to see Spain grow with regards to her wealth.